All right, so we are still trying to solve quadratic equations. When we solve a quadratic equation, you are figuring out either the solutions, which are called the roots, the zeros, the x-intercepts. Ultimately, if you put it on a graph, what are you finding when you solve it? You're finding your x-intercepts, okay? So we did graphing. We solved by taking the square root. Today, we're going to learn how you solve by factoring. Factoring is going to reveal two parentheses. That is your factored form. And if you remember, we were calling that intercept form. So the reason factoring is useful is because once you get it in factored form, you're going to go, oh, these are my x-intercepts, okay? So I have to show you to solve by factoring. Now here's some steps. The first thing that you've got to do is you've got to set the equation equal to 0. That means if there's stuff on both sides of the equal sign, you got to get it all on one side. If it is just f of x, you just write 0, okay? It has to be x squared, x, and number, okay? So, I'm going to start with number 4 here. All right, set it equal to 0. Well, f of x is the name of the function, and I just want it to figure out where it equals 0. 0 equals x squared plus 5x plus 6. Okay? Now, second thing you got to do is I need you to factor that. So, I went and I grabbed back my factoring flowchart so I can remember to ask myself these questions. Do you have a greatest common factor between x squared, 5x, and 6? Nope. Okay. How many terms do you got? 3. Okay. Is your a value equal to 1? It is. So you ask yourself, what two numbers do I multiply together to get positive 6 and add to get positive 5? Now, don't tell me, okay? Because remember, some of y'all are really good at factoring. Some of us are not so good at factoring. So I need to make sure that we slow down and we're thinking about what we're getting. All right. How do I figure out what multiplies to give me 6? Well, I could just start dividing stuff, but I got my calculator. How can my calculator help me? If I go to table, I take whatever number I want, which is 6, and I divide it by x. Because the calculator is going to start at 1, and it's going to do 6 divided by 1 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So I could get 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and then it starts repeating 3, 2. Okay? Now, I got to worry about my signs. Well, Miss Slusher doesn't mind this one too much because everything's positive. So what does that mean about all my numbers? They're all positive. I don't have any negatives. I'm going to break this x squared into how many parentheses? 2 parentheses. And what's going to be the front if I need to get x squared? It's going to be x and x. All right. How will I know which set of numbers is the right one? It's got to add to be 5. So what is 1 plus 6? Would be 7, not 5. What is 2 plus 3? So it's a positive 2, a positive 3. Now, you factored. You have now put it in factored form, or what we were calling intercept form. This form reveals your x-intercepts. Now, I'm going to show you the meaning and why this works. As you watch me do these problems, I think you're going to notice possibly a pattern that I'm going to let you use that pattern once you pick up on it. All right. Once you factor it, you got to set each factor equal to 0 and solve for x. So, x plus 2 equals 0. The factor x plus 3 equals 0. If you had a greatest common factor, you'd write it down. Let's say you had a greatest common factor of 7, and you wrote down 7 equals 0. Is it true that 7 ever equals 0? No. The greatest common factor would never be a solution. Main reason, it can't be 0. It don't have an x. Okay? All right. I need to find what x equals. You are not finished until you can tell me what x equals. So, if this is x, what's the inverse of a positive 2? Negative 2. So, got my equal sign. 2 minus 2 goes away. X equals, what is 0 minus 2? Negative 2. All right? And I need this x. It's plus 3. What's the inverse of plus 3? Minus 3. From both sides, that cancels. X equals, what is 0 minus 3? Negative 3. So your solutions, your roots, your zeros, your x-intercepts would be negative 2 and negative 3. All right, so let's do number 5. The first thing I need to do is I need to set this equal to 0. Here's why. You're looking for your x-intercepts, and your x-intercepts have a y value of 0. G of x is the same as y. So we're going to say I need to figure out when x squared minus 4 could equal 0. Now, the only variable term I have there is x squared. You could solve by taking the square root like we did yesterday, but I'm teaching you to solve by factoring. So that's what we're going to do. So you start at the top of your factoring flow chart. Do you have a greatest common factor between x squared and 4? No. Okay. How many terms you got? 2. Is this a difference? Yes, it's subtract of 2 perfect squares? Yes. So you bring down 0 equals. You have 2 parentheses. And what can you tell me about each of those parentheses? One has plus and one has a minus. Just like when we solved by taking the square root and we had plus minus. That's what you got here. What times itself gives you x squared? X times x. What times itself gives you 4? 2 times 2. Now, this is called factored form. That's how the formula sheet refers to it this year. We also call it intercept form because the factors reveal our x-intercepts. I'm not finished until I find out what this x could be to equal 0 and what this x could be to make the whole thing equal 0. So I'm going to take each factor, x plus 2, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. I'm going to take x minus 2, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. I'm going to solve now to find out what x is. So, if I need x by itself, what am I going to do with plus 2? What's the inverse of plus 2? Minus 2. And so, x could equal negative 2. That's great. And x minus 2 could equal 0. So, what's the inverse of minus 2? Plus 2 to both sides. So, x could equal 2. So your answer here, your solutions, your roots, I'm forgetting one, zeros are your x-intercepts, which are located at negative 2, positive 2, if you are to graph that function. Now we get down here to these. 6 is not part of the equation. 6 is just number 6, okay? I tried to put extra spaces, but who knows. Now, there is no f of x, and there's no g of x. I have x squared plus 2x minus 20 equals 15. I need every term on the same side so this thing could equal 0. What term is the one that needs to get with everybody else? The 15. I want 15 to move. So how are we going to get that 15 to move? What's the inverse of positive 15? Negative 15. All right, now, what I do to the right side, I got to do to the left. Which of these terms that are already over there is the like term for 15 because it's a constant? The 20. So what I'm going to do is if I already have a like term, I like to line it up under there so I make sure I add the right stuff. All right, equals 15 minus 15, this side is 0. That's what I wanted. You've got all of these terms and you need to add like terms. And it is critical that you get it in standard form, which means x squared comes first. So you have x squared plus 2x, and then what is negative 20 and negative 15 more? Well, if you don't know, oh no, low battery. Negative 20 minus 15 more gave me a negative 35. When I do teach you quadratic formula, this is the first step of quadratic formula also. You got to make sure you get everything on that side, x squared, x, then constant in that order. Now, I'm teaching you factoring. So up here, get the equation equal to 0, got that done. Factor completely, okay? So I'm going to follow my flow chart. Do you have a greatest common factor between 1x squared, 2x, and 35? Nope. Okay. How many terms you got? Okay. Is a equal to 1? Yes. So you ask yourself, what two numbers multiply to give you negative 35 and add to give you 2? Now, don't tell me the numbers. Because remember, we're having to think through this. It's been a while since we factored. Okay? All right. So I'm going to let my calculator help me get my factors. So I go to table and I type 35 divided by x because that tells the calculator to change the x and divide it differently every time. All right, so I'm going to write down my whole numbers. I've got 1 and 35. Decimals aren't factors. They don't help me. I've got 5 and 7 and then 7, 5. So that's it. Now I got to think about the signs. I got this little sign chart back here still. If I'm going to multiply and get a C that is negative and add to get a positive, that means the bigger number is positive and the little number is negative. So I've got my signs. X squared tells me I'm going to have 2 x's because x times x gives me x squared. The right set of numbers will add to give me 2. What is 35 minus 1 going to be? What's 35 minus 1? 34. Thank you, not 2. What is 7 minus 5? That'd be 2. So minus 5 plus 7. So that's my numbers. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to figure out what x could go right here, minus 5 and be 0. Okay? What x could go right here, add 7 to it equals 0. Now, technically, I'm supposed to make you write out x minus 5 equals 0 and x plus 7 equals 0. But this is intercept form, and you're looking for your intercepts. A few weeks ago when we did intercept form, how would you tell me what your intercepts were? What would you do? What have you noticed you've been doing? Taking the opposite. In factored form, it's the opposite. If you know that, I'm okay with you taking that little bit of a shortcut. You know it's intercept form or factored form. It's going to be your opposite. So what number minus 5 would give you 0? What's the opposite of negative 5? Positive 5. And what number, when you add 7, would give you 0? Negative 7. It's the opposites. Now, I do want to point something out here, though. On my answer key, a lot of times especially like when I use the worksheet generator or whatever, the answer key would say negative 7 and 5. Does it matter if I flip the order? No. But what if I said negative 5, positive 7? That's wrong, okay? You have to solve for x, set it equal to 0, solve for x. I'm just letting you take a shortcut because you recognize it, okay? If it was a more complicated factor, which you'll see when we do number 7 in just a few minutes, you might actually want to set it equal to 0 and solve, okay? All right, I'm going to skip 7 for a minute because it is a little complicated. And I'm going to go down here to 8. First thing you've got to do before you can get started is make sure everything is on the same side equal to 0. Is every term on the same side and this equals 0? Yes, that's wonderful. Less work we got to do. You got to factor. Do you have a greatest common factor? No. A is equal to 1, so you ask yourself, what two numbers multiply to give you negative 17 and add to give you 16? Now, it is possible that something will not factor. And if it will not factor, then you got to figure out a different way to do it. Most people are going to, this one is going to be the one that they get wrong. Because you're going to say, Miss Slusher, there is nothing that multiplies to get 17. Except itself and 1. So 1 and 17. I don't know if I said 7. I meant to say 17. All right. 1 times 17. That's the only way to get 17. You got to get the negatives and the positive in the right spot. If nothing works, nothing works. You can't do it. It is what it is. But something works here. You're going to multiply two numbers and get a negative. So what does that mean about your two numbers? One has to be positive and one is negative. When you add a positive and a negative and you end up with positive, that means you started with more positives, so the little number must be negative. Now, I need you to double check. If this really adds together to get 16, that's it, and I can keep going. If it don't, I need to try again. What is 17 minus 1? 16. I think I said 17 a while ago. I meant to say 16. So, that's my numbers. So, how many parentheses do I need? 2. What goes at the very front of each one? X and X. And then I've got minus 1 plus 17. Somebody's going to say, I'm done. You're not done until you get X equals. So, you could set each of these equal to 0. X minus 1 equals 0. Solve it and tell me what you get. Or, you can recognize that this is factored form, which is also called intercept form. You could take the shortcut. When it's in the parentheses and you take it out, what do you notice? What do you get? You take the opposite. What number minus 1 would make this 0? What's the opposite of negative 1? Positive 1. And, or comma, what number would I put right here, add 17 to it, and still get 0? Negative 17. So your shortcut is you're really just taking the opposite. I need to solve this, and I've been told that I have to solve by factoring. Okay? And so in order to solve by factoring, what do I have to do first? Get it all on one side. Which I could really move this one over here, or I could move both of these over. I don't really like to do more work than I've got to, so what's the only one that's out of place right now, really? 15X. The 15x. So I'm going to move the 15x. So how do I move a positive 15x? I make it a negative 15x. Okay? Now, when I go to put this over here, it doesn't really match. So where's it going to end up? True. On the left side, but as far as, what's the order going to be? Let me ask it that way. What order would I put this? In between them. 6x squared, and then minus 15x plus 9. That's what I was trying to say, but I didn't think of a very good way to say it. Okay? So, why didn't I add this with the 6? They're not the same. It's just x. Why didn't I add it with the 9? It don't have an x. The 9 doesn't have an x, okay? So, I'm moving it. But just because I moved it doesn't mean it's going to actually combine with something. I do have to be careful and make sure that I have x squared, x, and constant. Now, I have to factor, okay? I start by saying, do I have a greatest common factor between 6, 15, and 9? What is the biggest number they will all divide by? 3. All right. So, give myself a little more room there. I'm going to divide each of these. Why did I put 6? I don't know. By their greatest common factor of 3, and then we got to tell what's left over. What is 6x squared divided by 3? 2x squared. What is negative 15x divided by 3? Negative 5x. What is positive 9 divided by 3? Positive 3. All right, so we got our greatest common factor out of here, but we're not done until we factor it completely. So if you're following your flow chart, did we have a greatest common factor? Sure did. Now, how many terms we got?
3.
3 terms. Is your A value equal to 1? So you've got to do slide, divide, bottoms up. So this problem gets really huge. So let me write myself a note. Slide, divide, bottoms up. Okay? Now, I'm going to work the whole problem exactly like what I would do, even setting it equal to 0. And then I'm going to see if you could find a place where there could have been a shortcut point. Okay? All right. Slide means I take the 2, I slide it over here to C, and I multiply. So I end up with x squared minus 5x. What is 2 times 3 going to give us? Not x, but because I don't take the x, but just 6. Okay? I did slide. Now I got to factor. I got to figure out 2 numbers that multiply to give me positive 6, but add to give me negative 5. Now don't tell me. I got to think through it. Well, x squared is going to bust into x and x. I could multiply 1 times 6 to get 6 or 2 times 3. But let's think about our signs. And you've even got your sign chart on the back of your little flow chart if you need it. You're going to multiply to get a positive. So that means they're either both positive or both negative. But if you multiply to get a positive, add to get a negative, they got to both be negative. I'm trying to add to get negative 5. So what's negative 1 plus negative 6? Negative 7, not negative 5. What's negative 2 plus negative 3?
Negative 5.
Negative 5. So minus 2 minus 3. Now, you can't stop there and be like, bam, I got my answers.
You still got a 3 on the front.
You got to do divide, and you got 3 on the front. You got to divide as well. You slid and multiplied by 2, so what you going to divide by now?
By 2.
By the 2. I need you to remember that you have to actually divide these things. So, what is negative 2 divided by 2 going to give us?
1.
Negative 1, good. Is negative 3 over 2 going to change any?
No.
No. Okay. You did slide, you did divide. Now remember, you're factoring completely. You got to bring down your equal 0, and you also got to bring down your 3. Oh, man, hold on. I didn't do bottoms up yet, did I?
Nope.
I ain't ready to bring it down. My bad, buddy. All right, bottoms up. There is no bottom, so that becomes x minus 1. Here's my bottom. Bottoms up becomes 2x minus 3. Now I'm ready and finish factoring to bring down my 3. All we've done so far is a lot of work. You have factored it. You have now put your answer in factored form. We've been taking a shortcut. You can take a shortcut right here and say, what's the opposite of negative 1? X would be positive 1. But right here, you can't take the shortcut because you could say what's the opposite of negative 3, but then you still got this. So you would have to do this. 2x minus 3, you'd have to set it equal to 0. If you're solving for x, what do? You add 3 to both sides. You get 2x equals 3. Is x by itself?
No.
No. How do you undo times 2? You gotta divide by 2. X equals 3 over 2. Here's your 2 very crooked, not lined up answers. Now here's my question to you. Have you seen those numbers before in this problem? You see those numbers anywhere? You see them right there. When you're doing slide, divide, bottoms up, and you're solving, like trying to find what x is, don't bottoms up. You had those 2 numbers right there. As soon as you got the parentheses, you've got it in factored form, you could have said, what are my opposites? My intercepts would be 1 and 3 over 2. Now, to factor, you have to bottoms up. When you're solving, you would say, all right, I got them, let me just take the opposite. So, to solve by factoring, you get everything equal to 0. Everything on one side, make sure it is x squared x number. You factor it. You set each factor equal to 0, which we notice the pattern. We're really just taking the opposite. It all becomes the opposite. And you can check them by plugging back in. I didn't make you do that. But let's say if you check this 1. You would plug in 1 everywhere you add an x. If the left side equals the right side, you're correct. If it don't, you're wrong. So that is all of solving by factoring.